everybody, it's Professor Malat here with some week 6 content information. I wanted to make a separate video and talk to you a little bit about a couple of things. One of them is multimodality, and you will see on the screen here there's a reading from the University of Mississippi Ret Lab this week dealing with multimodality. I'm going to kind of walk you through this reading. I will show the pages that are up, that come up, and explain them a little bit. That way, if you don't feel like you have the time to read through that reading, you don't have to. You can watch the video instead. The other thing is something that's called visual literacy, and I haven't really talked too much about it, although when I teach my face to face classes, I usually will go off on some kind of tangent where I talk about how we can interpret images and videos and the things to be looking for. So, I wanted to talk about these two things since it's kind of open as far as the quote unquote text that you are choosing to analyze for this first rhetorical analysis project. So, multimodality, think about it and break down the word into its elements, right? We have multi, which is many, and then we have modal, and modality is kind of the way or the form that a text will take. So we can be presented information in many different ways, in many different modes. So this module in the University of Mississippi Ret Lab explains that a little bit better. So make sure that you click through all of the pages by using the next button. I find that this image here, this graph is helpful to explain the various modes that are going on when we're presented with a mode is just a means of communicating, right? And there are five main modes: visual, linguistic, spatial, oral, having to do with ears, and gestural, right? It's different than medium, right? It's different than print or video or sound, music, so on and so forth, but they are related. So we have multimedia and we have multimodal. So think of the modes as these various ways that we can communicate with one another. We have visual, oral, gestural, spatial, and linguistic. Visual obviously has to do with things like images, the things that we see. Oral has to do with the things that we hear, so that could be spoken word, sounds, music, that kind of thing. Gestural, here I am doing it, uh, often comes into play when we are watching speakers or watching actors, right? We have gestures that help to emphasize what's being spoken, or to, visually indicate something like you're going over there, or this is my calendar over here where I'm pointing. And that can be a nonverbal way of communicating. Spatial is essentially has to do with objects and how they take up space. So you can think of how a room is arranged physically, the arrangement of the various objects in the room, how people are in proximity to one another, how a speaker might use the stage when they are giving a presentation, how a body moves through space, and you can think of things like dance and that kind of stuff. So that's another way of communicating. And then we have linguistic, and linguistic has to do with language, right? So it can be the written text, it can be the spoken text, but is primarily focused on words. Um, so there is this relationship between modes and media. Remember, mode is a means of communication, and the medium is the channel or the way through which that communication is conveyed. Um, so make sure you read through that. Moving through, they provide examples of each of the modes, which I kind of gave to you. Um, but these are all things to be thinking about as you start to analyze whatever it is you're analyzing. So Here, especially with linguistic or alphabetic, if you have chosen an article or an essay or a written speech to analyze, you are going to be focusing on how that creator has used the written word to communicate. So things include word choice, delivery of the text, organization of the words into sentences and paragraphs, so on and so forth. It's not always the most important mode, but it can be used um, together with other modes. Sometimes with speech, we do have the written word, but we also have the spoken word, or with poetry or anything like that. Um, but the linguistic mode is the best way to express details and list. Spatial, again, they give you some examples here. Um, Oh, gestural. Gestural mode refers to the way movement is interpreted. So things like facial gestures, facial expressions, hand gestures, body language, um, and interaction between people are all gestural modes. And you can also think of sign language, right? American Sign Language is a very gestural mode of speaking, and there's not only the hand gestures, but also often there's facial expressions or certain body language that comes into play that helps to convey the meaning of that gestural mode of communication. Hopefully, this is all making sense to you, and I will try to drive home the fact of why this mattered. Again, they have more examples of multimodality. So multimodality, think of it's using a combination of the various types of modes, right? So something might primarily focus on the linguistic mode. You see here a standard scholarly book that's in print. This is primarily linguistic, but it's also visual, right? Because we have to use our eyes to see it. And spatial mode has to do with how all of the words, things like font, color, spacing, how the words are arranged on the page, all of those things come into play, right? And they're usually done for a particular reason. So these are things to keep in mind. Another example is a podcast plus a website. Um, NPR's daily picture show, so on and so forth. And then they have these little practice quizzes here um, that you can test yourself on if you want to. And then the outcome here, what are remediation and remix? So in previous classes, I used to have students do like a research report, and then after that, they do something and kind of flip how they do how they did that written report, and they put it into another genre and kind of remix it. So that's what this is all about. This one is not as important, although it's interesting to see how something that was primarily a written piece can be reinterpreted and reconfigured so that it reaches a different type of audience. Um, and then it talks about attribution. We don't have to get into this right now. We'll probably revisit this in the research unit. Um, and then putting it all together, multimodality, which is just a summary and a recap. All right, so that is the information from the University of Mississippi Rhet Lab. And then I have this page here from the University of Birmingham on visual literacy. So it's important to know how to interpret and analyze um, not only images, but videos, right? We need to use analytical skills to make sense of the rhetorical situation. So there are things to keep in mind, like the sender, the author, or the creator, the receiver, the audience, the viewer, the reader, um, the intention, purpose, or goal, and the message or the content. So it's important to know how to look closely to images and videos. Um, or a series of images, reading the captions, any kind of metadata that might be related, any other kind of text that is related to the image. So you should be able to describe that image or what it represents, identify the techniques used to produce it, whether it's original or reproduction, and then recognize if that image has been altered. Is it a detail of a larger image? Have the colors been changed? So on and so forth. So it's important here to what we're doing with the rhetorical analysis, especially if you are choosing to focus on either a print advertisement or a video commercial or a music video or something that is primarily in the visual mode, right? So it's important to look to be able to train your eyes to have that kind of literacy and be able to interpret and analyze what is being communicated through that image. You have to always keep in mind that when an image is used, um, in a certain way, it's a way of persuading the audience, right? It might provoke an emotional response. I often think of the commercial with done by the ASPCA, where Sarah McLachlan is the spokesperson and one of her songs is singing in the background. And the audience is bombarded with images of these poor, helpless animals that need to be cared for, right? And that's the primary goal of the ASPCA is to take care of these animals that have been mistreated. And they raise money. And so they put out this advertisement. And of course, the primary method of persuading is to get an emotional response from the audience. Why? Because if you feel sorry for these animals, you're more likely to donate to that cause, right? So there is a particular rhetorical purpose for having those kinds of images and linking it up with emotional music, right? And then we see again, of course, the spokesperson of Sarah McLachlan, who is the creator of the music, and she supports the cause and she is giving her credible authority there, right? As a not only as a musician and a notable person, but also because she cares about animals, right? So, you know, if you're a fan of Sarah McLachlan, you may be more persuaded to donate to the ASPCA. That's the kind of thing that is going on in these types of video appeals, and where we're using images to help have some kind of a persuasive effect and hopefully get an emotional response from a particular audience, right? And you know that not everything is going to fall the same way or evoke a certain response in different people, right? If you are not the targeted audience, it is going to fall flat. And I think often back to last year's Super Bowl. We're coming up on Super Bowl Sunday this week. But in last year's Super Bowl, there was an overwhelmingly popular commercial for popcorners, and they used it. It was directed by the director of the show Breaking Bad. However, if you had never seen the show Breaking Bad, if you weren't a fan of the show, if you just watched that commercial, a lot of the humor would have been lost, right? So there's not that emotional appeal. So it was targeting a certain type of audience. Yes, it's targeting people who are sitting in front of the TV solely to watch Super Bowl commercials, but also it's targeting fans of that Breaking Bad show, right? People who may have watched the show understand the little bit of subtext that's going on within the commercial, and perhaps will be more likely to try popcorners, right? I haven't tried them. I've watched the show. I thought the commercial was funny, but I still haven't tried popcorners. So I don't know if I was the target audience or not. So hopefully you get the idea here that you become more skilled at interpreting images, videos, and understanding that the creators often have some kind of motive behind it, right? That they're using it to a specific rhetorical purpose to have an effect on a particular audience. So if you can figure out who the audience is and what the purpose is, you've knocked out half of the battle of the rhetorical analysis project. So hopefully this clears up a few things. I will link this page in our week 6 overview, um, so that when I do the overview video, you'll actually see it there, and we'll know what I'm talking about. Okay, so multimodality and visual literacy, really important things when you are deciding to focus on something other than a printed essay or an article, to do your analysis. All right, take care, everybody. Bye bye.